The August sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt as I pulled my aging Honda Civic into the driveway of my childhood home. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd last set foot in this small Colorado town. 3 years since I'd graduated high school and escaped to the University of California, Berkeley. 3 years since I'd left behind everything familiar and comfortable chasing dreams, and if I was honest with myself, running from truths I wasn't ready to face. Now at 21 I was back, at least temporarily. My name is Alex Morrison, and if you'd told my 17-year-old self that I'd be returning home with a degree in hand, out and proud, I would have laughed in your face. But life has a funny way of surprising you, of pushing you into becoming the person you were always meant to be, even when you fight it every step of the way. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the two-story colonial that housed so many memories, both good and complicated. The lawn was immaculately maintained as always, my father's pride and joy. The flower beds my mother tended with religious devotion were bursting with late summer blooms. Everything looked exactly the same, frozen in time, as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for my return. But I had changed, God had I changed. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, a text from my older brother, Connor. Connor, where are you? Mom's been packing for an hour. She made enough food to feed an army. Fair warning, she's in full mother hen mode. I smiled despite my nervousness. Connor had always been my protector, my confidant, the one person in this town who knew me, really knew me. When I came out to him during my freshman year of college, terrified of his reaction, he'd simply said, "Took you long enough, little brother, I've known since you were 15. Then he'd told me he loved me, that nothing would ever change that, and proceeded to become my fiercest advocate. Coming out to my parents had been harder, much harder. Me just pulled in, bracing myself, how's the parental unit? Connor, dad's dad, trying, mom, excited, also trying, it'll be fine, probably, maybe. Connor, oh, and heads up, Jake's here. My heart stopped just for a second, but it stopped. Jake Mitchell? My brother's best friend since middle school, the boy who'd been a constant presence in our house throughout high school, who treated our home like his second residence. The boy with the easy smile and the warm brown eyes that could make you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. The boy I'd been hopelessly, desperately, painfully in love with since I was 15 years old. Me, why is Jake there? Connor, he's here for the weekend, drove in from Denver, wanted to surprise you, surprise. Connor, you okay? Was I okay? That was a complicated question. I'd spent 3 years and 3,000 miles trying to get over Jake Mitchell. 3 years of therapy, of dating other guys, of building a life where he was nothing but a distant memory, a childhood crush I'd long since outgrown. I'd convinced myself I'd succeeded, that seeing him again would mean nothing, that I was over it, over him, completely and totally moved on. The way my hands were suddenly shaking on the steering wheel suggested otherwise. Me, I'm fine, be right in. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked different than I had 3 years ago. I'd filled out, started working out regularly, let my dark hair grow longer on top in a style that actually suited my face instead of the awkward short crop I'd maintained in high school. I'd learned how to dress myself, how to stand with confidence instead of trying to take up as little space as possible. I'd learned how to be myself. But none of that preparation felt adequate for seeing Jake Mitchell again. You're 21 years old, I told my reflection. You're a college graduate, you've lived in California, you've dated, you're not that scared, closeted kid anymore, you can handle this. My reflection looked skeptical. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and headed for the front door. It swung open before I could reach for the handle, and then my mother was there, tears already streaming down her face. Alex, oh baby, let me look at you. Hi, Mom, I managed before she pulled me into a hug that threatened to crack ribs. Ellen Morrison was 5'3" and looked like she'd blow away in a strong wind, but she hugged like a bear. You look so good, so grown up and thin, are you eating enough? Of course you're not eating enough, that's why I made your favorites. Come in, everyone's in the kitchen. She was still talking as she pulled me inside, a hurricane of maternal energy and barely contained emotion. The house smelled exactly like I remembered, a mixture of vanilla candles, old wood, and whatever delicious thing was baking in the kitchen. I let myself be dragged down the familiar hallway, past the family photos on the wall that chronicled Connor's and my childhood in awkward, progressive stages. And then we were in the kitchen, and there he was. Jake Mitchell looked like 3 years had been very, very good to him. He'd always been attractive, objectively so, in a way that had made my teenage years a special kind of torture. But now, at 24, he'd grown into himself completely. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the lean, muscled build of someone who worked with his hands. His brown hair was styled in that effortlessly messy way that probably took more effort than it appeared. He was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans that fit him perfectly, and when he looked up from the beer he was holding and our eyes met, that same easy smile I remembered spread across his face. "Alex, man, look at you." He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug before I could prepare myself. He was warm and solid, and he smelled like cedar and something indefinably him, and for just a second, one traitorous second, I let myself relax into it, let myself remember what it felt like to be this close to him. Then reality reasserted itself and I pulled back, forcing a smile that I hoped looked natural. "Hey Jake, didn't expect to see you here." "Couldn't miss the return of the prodigal son," he said, punching my shoulder lightly in that way guys do when they're trying to show affection without being too emotional about it. "Plus, your brother wouldn't shut up about you coming home, figured I should see what all the fuss was about." "There's no fuss," Connor interjected, appearing from the direction of the living room. He was 2 years older than me, taller, broader, with the athletic build of someone who'd played football through college and still hit the gym religiously. We had the same dark hair, the same gray-blue eyes, the same Morrison nose that our mother insisted was distinguished, but that I'd always thought was just a bit too prominent. I merely mentioned occasionally that my little brother was finally gracing us with his presence. "You called me 4 times in one day to make sure I hadn't forgotten," I pointed out. "Details." My father appeared in the doorway and the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Robert Morrison was a big man, not fat but solid, with hands that looked like they could crush walnuts and a presence that had always seemed to take up more space than his physical form should allow. He'd been a high school football coach for 30 years and he carried himself like it. We'd had a difficult relationship since I came out. Not terrible, he'd never disowned me or kicked me out or any of the horror stories I'd heard from other LGBTQ+ kids. But there was a distance now, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. Like he wasn't quite sure how to relate to me anymore, this son who'd turned out to be something he hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. "Alex," he said, nodding, "good to have you home." "Good to be home, Dad." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the unspoken things between us filling the space like thick fog. Then my mother, bless her, swooped in with her usual perfect timing. "All right, everyone to the table, dinner's ready and I won't have it getting cold while you all stand around staring at each other. Jake, honey, you're staying, obviously. Connor, help me carry Alex, sit down, you must be exhausted from the drive." The next hour passed in a blur of food and conversation. My mother had indeed made all my favorites, her famous lasagna, garlic bread, Caesar salad, and a chocolate cake that I knew must have taken her half the day to prepare. She asked 1,000 questions about Berkeley, about my classes, about my plans now that I'd graduated. My father was quieter, contributing mainly nods and the occasional grunt of approval, but he was there present, trying in his own way. Connor and Jake fell into their usual easy banter, the kind that comes from a decade and a half of friendship. They'd met in 7th grade when Jake moved to town and they'd been inseparable ever since. Sports, school, college, they'd gone to the same state university together, roomed together, and now they both worked at the same construction company in Denver, Connor as a site manager and Jake as a contractor. I tried not to watch Jake too closely, but it was impossible not to notice things. The way he laughed, throwing his head back unself-consciously. The way he listened when someone was talking, giving them his full attention. The way his hands moved when he told a story, animated and expressive. 3 years and he still made my chest tight. "So, Alex," Jake said during a lull in the conversation, turning those warm brown eyes on me. "Connor tells me you're planning to stick around for a while, not heading back to California." "Not immediately," I said, acutely aware that everyone at the table was suddenly paying very close attention to this exchange. "I've got some job applications out in Denver, actually. Figured I'd stay here while I wait to hear back, save some money on rent." "Denver," my mother's face lit up, "but that's so close you'd only be an hour away." "That's the idea, Mom." "What kind of jobs?" my father asked. It was the first real question he directed at me all evening. "Marketing, mostly. Social media management, content creation, that kind of thing. My degree's in communications, so I'm trying to leverage that." He nodded slowly and I could practically see him trying to understand what social media management even meant. To Robert Morrison, real work meant physical labor, tangible results. The digital world I'd chosen to inhabit might as well have been Mars. "Denver's great," Jake chimed in, and I felt an irrational gratitude toward him for filling the awkward silence. Lot of opportunities there, and hey, if you do end up there, at least you'll know a couple people. Me and Connor can show you around, introduce you to folks. That'd be great, I said, meaning it. Even if being around Jake was complicated, the idea of having some familiar faces in a new city was appealing. We could get an apartment together, Connor said suddenly, his face brightening. I've been wanting to move out of my current place anyway, the landlord's a nightmare. We could split a 2-bedroom, make it work. Something shifted in my chest. Living with Connor again like we had growing up, the idea was both appealing and terrifying. We'd always been close, but we'd also spent the last 3 years living separate lives, becoming our own people. Would we fall back into old patterns? Would it be weird? Think about it, Connor added, seeing my hesitation. No pressure, just throwing it out there. I will, I promised. After dinner, Connor and Jake volunteered to clean up, which left me with my parents in the living room. My mother wanted to hear every detail about Berkeley, about my friends there, about my life. My father sat in his recliner, half watching a baseball game on TV, occasionally grunting his acknowledgement of some point in the conversation. It was exhausting and wonderful and achingly familiar all at once. By the time Connor and Jake finished in the kitchen, I was fatting fast. The 6-hour drive from Berkeley was catching up with me, and the emotional weight of being home again was heavier than I'd anticipated. I should probably head out, Jake said, checking his phone. Let you guys have your family time. You're staying at your parents' place? Connor asked. Yeah, just for the weekend, heading back to Denver Sunday night. They did that complicated bro hug thing, complete with back slapping, and then Jake turned to me. For a second, I thought he might try to hug me again, but instead he just offered his hand. I shook it, trying not to notice how warm his palm was, how his grip was firm without being crushing. Really good to see you, Alex, he said, and there was something in his eyes, some softness that made my heart do a stupid little flip. Welcome home. Thanks, Jake. And then he was gone, and I could finally breathe properly again. Connor shot me a look that I couldn't quite decipher. You okay? Exhausted, I said, which wasn't a lie. Yeah, you look beat, go crash, we can catch up more tomorrow. I hugged my parents goodnight, my mother holding on just a bit too long, my father's embrace awkward but genuine, and then climbed the stairs to my old bedroom. It was exactly as I'd left it. Movie posters on the walls, books on the shelves, my old desk in the corner where I'd spent countless hours doing homework, and if I was honest, daydreaming about Jake Mitchell. My twin bed with its navy blue comforter. The window that looked out over the backyard where Connor, Jake, and I had spent so many summer evenings throwing a football around. I collapsed onto the bed without bothering to unpack, staring at the ceiling. 3 years? I'd been gone for 3 years, and I'd thought that would be enough time, enough distance, enough growth. I'd thought I'd come back a different person, someone who could see Jake as just his brother's friend, nothing more. But 5 minutes in his presence and I was 15 again, hopelessly infatuated, wanting things I couldn't have. My phone buzzed, another text from Connor. Connor, for what it's worth, he asked about you, a lot while you were gone. I stared at the message, my heart doing that stupid flip thing again. Me, what does that mean? Connor, just thought you should know, get some sleep, little brother, tomorrow's a new day. I set my phone on the nightstand and rolled over, pulling the pillow over my head. Tomorrow was a new day, but right now it felt like I was stuck in the past, caught in a feeling I'd never quite managed to escape. Welcome home indeed. I woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen. For a disoriented moment, I forgot where I was, expecting to see the bland white walls of my Berkeley apartment. Then memory returned, home, Colorado, Jake, and I groaned into my pillow. My phone said it was 8:47 a.m. Downstairs, my mother was probably in full breakfast mode, which meant enough food to feed a small army and an expectation that everyone would gather around the table like a Norman Rockwell painting. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on some clean clothes, and headed downstairs. Connor was at the kitchen table with my father, both of them tucking into massive plates of eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. My mother was at the stove, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes. Morning, I mumbled, making a beeline for the coffee pot. Good morning, honey, my mother beamed at me. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes. Sit, I'll fix you a plate. Mom, you don't have to. But she was already piling food onto a plate with the single-minded determination of a woman who expressed love through carbohydrates. I accepted it with a grateful smile and sat down across from Connor. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Like the dead." My father looked up from his newspaper because yes, he still read an actual physical newspaper every morning. "Got plans today?" "Not really, thought I'd just unpack, settle in." "Jake called," Connor said casually, but there was something in his tone that made me look up sharply. "Wants to know if we want to grab lunch at Rosie's for old time's sake." Rosie's Diner? The place where Connor, Jake, and I had spent countless afternoons during high school, occupying the same corner booth for hours while we did homework, talked about nothing, and consumed unhealthy amounts of French fries and milkshakes. The thought of going back there felt both nostalgic and dangerous. "I don't know," I started, but Connor cut me off. "Come on, it'll be fun. Besides, when's the last time the three of us just hung out? I miss that." There was genuine wistfulness in his voice, and I realized that my 3-year absence hadn't just been hard on me. Connor and I had always been close, and being separated had created a distance between us that couldn't be fully bridged by phone calls and video chats. "Okay," I heard myself say, "yeah, let's do it." Connor's face split into a wide grin. "Awesome, I'll text him." The rest of breakfast passed in comfortable family chatter. My mother wanted to know if I needed anything for my room, if my clothes from 3 years ago still fit, they didn't mostly. If I wanted her to do my laundry, absolutely not, Mom, I'm 21. My father asked about my car if it needed any maintenance, and seemed disappointed when I told him I just had it serviced before leaving California. After breakfast, I spent a few hours unpacking and organizing my room. It was strange, sorting through the artifacts of my teenage years with the perspective of my adult self. Movie posters that seemed embarrassingly juvenile now, books I'd once loved but had long since outgrown, a shoebox full of old photos that I knew I shouldn't look at but couldn't resist. There was one of Connor, Jake, and me from my junior year of high school. We were in the backyard, muddy and grinning after an impromptu football game in the rain. Jake's arm was slung around my shoulders, and I was looking up at him with an expression that was so obviously smitten that I was amazed no one had ever called me out on it. I shoved the photo back in the box and pushed it to the back of my closet. At noon, Connor knocked on my door, ready. As I'll ever be. The drive to Rosie's took 15 minutes, which Connor filled with updates about his life, his job, the house he and Jake were thinking about buying together as an investment property, the girl he'd been seeing casually but didn't think was going anywhere serious. "What about you?" he asked as we pulled into Rosie's parking lot. "Anyone special in California?" "I'd dated a few guys at Berkeley. Nothing that lasted more than a few months. Nothing that felt particularly meaningful or deep. How could it when I was constantly comparing everyone to an idealized version of Jake Mitchell that existed only in my head?" "Not really," I said. "I dated but nothing serious." Connor gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. "You deserve someone great, you know, someone who sees how amazing you are." Before I could respond to that, before I could even begin to process it, Jake's truck pulled into the space next to us. He got out looking unfairly good in a faded blue Henley and jeans, sunglasses pushed up on his head, that easy smile already in place. "The gang's all here," he announced, "just like old times." Rosie's hadn't changed. Same red vinyl booths, same black and white checkered floor, same laminated menus that probably hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Even the waitress who greeted us, Maggie, who'd been working there since before we were born, looked exactly the same. "Connor Morrison, is that you? And Jake Mitchell, and oh my goodness, little Alex Morrison, look at you all grown up." "Hi Maggie," I said, accepting her enthusiastic hug. "Your mama told me you were coming home, bet she's just thrilled. Sit, I'll get you boys some coffee." We slid into our old booth, Connor and Jake on one side, me on the other, just like always. Maggie brought coffee and we ordered without looking at the menus. All of us got the same things we'd always ordered, burgers and fries, nothing fancy, nothing changed. For a while, it really was like old times. We fell into familiar rhythms, old jokes, shared memories. Connor and Jake told stories about mishaps on construction sites. I shared some of the more ridiculous moments from my college experience. We laughed easily and I felt myself relaxing in a way I hadn't since arriving home. But then Jake turned to me with a more serious expression. "So Alex, Connor mentioned you came out while you were at Berkeley. That must have been a lot." The table went quiet. Connor shot Jake a look I couldn't quite read, and I felt my defenses go up automatically. "It was," I said carefully, "but it was also necessary. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't." Jake nodded slowly. "That takes a lot of courage. I'm glad you were able to do that, to be yourself." There was something in his voice, some quality I couldn't identify. It almost sounded like admiration, but that couldn't be right. "Thanks," I said, not sure what else to say. "When did you know?" Jake asked, "if that's not too personal." Connor shifted uncomfortably, but I found that I didn't mind the question. From Jake, it felt like genuine curiosity, not judgment or prurience. "I think I always knew on some level," I said, "but I really understood it when I was around 15. That's when I stopped being able to lie to myself about it." 15, the year Jake and Connor were seniors, the year I'd watch Jake at football games and feel things I didn't have words for yet. The year I'd realized that what I felt wasn't just admiration or wanting to be like him, it was wanting to be with him. Jake's eyes were thoughtful. "Must have been hard keeping that to yourself in high school. This town isn't exactly known for being progressive." "It wasn't easy," I admitted, "but I had Connor that helped." My brother reached across the table and squeezed my shoulder. "Always, little brother." The conversation shifted after that, moving to safer topics, but something had changed. There was a new awareness in the air, an acknowledgement of truths that had never been spoken aloud before. Jake knew I was gay. Jake had asked about it, seemingly genuinely interested, and for some reason that felt more significant than it probably should. After lunch, Jake suggested we go throw a football around in the park like we used to. I hadn't thrown a football in years. I'd never been particularly athletic, unlike Connor and Jake, but I found myself agreeing. The park was mostly empty on a Saturday afternoon, the August heat keeping most people indoors. We found an open area and fell into an easy rhythm, the three of us forming a triangle, tossing the ball back and forth. I was rusty, my throws wobbling more than they should, but neither Connor nor Jake gave me grief about it. In fact, Jake went out of his way to make sure I was included, adjusting his throws to make them easier for me to catch, offering pointers that were helpful rather than condescending. "You're actually not bad," he said after I managed a particularly good throw. "Better than you were in high school, at least." "Low bar," I pointed out, and he laughed. We played for maybe half an hour before the heat became too much. We collapsed under a tree, passing around a water bottle Connor had brought from his truck, catching our breath. "This is nice," Jake said, leaning back on his hands, his face tilted toward the sky. "Feels like nothing's changed." But everything had changed. I was different. The world was different. And the way I was looking at Jake right now, watching the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the way his t-shirt clung to his chest, the way he smiled so easily at something Connor said, that was definitely different. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe this was exactly the same as it had always been, and that was the problem. "We should do this more often," Connor said. "If Alex ends up in Denver, we could make it a regular thing." "I'd be down for that," Jake said, and when he looked at me there was something in his expression that made my breath catch. "Would be good to have you around again, Alex, really good." "Yeah," I managed, "that would be nice." We stayed in the park a while longer, talking about nothing and everything, the afternoon stretching out lazy and golden around us. And for those few hours, I could almost pretend that this was simple, that my feelings were uncomplicated, that wanting Jake Mitchell didn't feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. Almost. When Jake finally said he had to head out dinner with his parents, he explained, I felt an irrational surge of disappointment. He hugged Connor goodbye, then turned to me. This time he did go in for a hug, and I let myself have it, let myself memorize the feeling for later, for when I'd be alone and could safely fall apart about it. "See you soon, Alex," he said softly, just for me. "Yeah, see you, Jake." Connor and I watched him drive away, and then my brother turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between sympathy and determination. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that you're clearly still in love with my best friend." My heart stopped. "Connor, Don't, he held up a hand. Don't deny it. I've known since you were 15, remember? I was hoping maybe you'd gotten over it while you were gone, but he shook his head. It's still there, I can see it. I wanted to deny it. Every instinct I had screamed at me to laugh it off, to deflect, to protect myself. But this was Connor, my brother, the person who'd known me longest and best. I'm trying, I said quietly. I'm really trying to get over it. Why? The question caught me off guard. Why, Connor, he's your best friend, he's straight, it's never going to happen, those seem like pretty good reasons. Connor was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty park. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. What if I told you that things might not be as simple as you think they are? What does that mean? I mean, he ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with something. Look, it's not my story to tell, but Jake, he's been different since you left. He asks about you all the time. I don't know, I can't explain it. I'm probably just seeing things that aren't there. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Connor. Don't give me hope about something that's not real. I can't handle that. He looked at me and there was something painful in his expression. I'm not trying to give you false hope, I'm just saying, keep an open mind, pay attention, that's all. He's straight, I repeated, needing to believe it, needing that barrier to stay in place. Maybe, Connor said, or maybe he's just as scared as you are. He wouldn't say anything more after that, no matter how much I pressed him. We drove home in silence and I spent the rest of the evening in my room, Connor's words playing on repeat in my mind. Keep an open mind, pay attention. As if I'd been able to do anything but pay attention to Jake Mitchell for the past 6 years. As if hope wasn't the most dangerous thing I could possibly feel. But it was too late, the seed was planted, and despite every logical argument I could make, despite every reason I had to protect my heart, I could feel it taking root. Hope, terrible, beautiful, impossible hope. I was in so much trouble. The next 2 weeks fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. I spent my mornings working on job applications and building my professional portfolio. Afternoons were often spent with my mother, helping her in the garden, running errands, catching up on 3 years of her life that couldn't be adequately conveyed through phone calls. Evenings usually involved my father in some capacity, watching baseball games or helping him with projects around the house, our interactions still slightly awkward but getting easier each day. And then there was Jake. He kept finding reasons to come by. Sometimes it was to see Connor, they were still working on that investment property deal, apparently. Sometimes it was to help my dad with something in the garage. Sometimes he'd just show up with coffee or lunch, claiming he was in the neighborhood, even though his parents' house was on the other side of town. I tried not to read too much into it, tried not to notice the way his eyes would seek me out when he walked in, or the way he always seemed to gravitate toward wherever I was in the house. Tried not to let Connor's words echo in my head every time Jake smiled at me. Pay attention, my brother had said, so I did, and what I noticed was slowly driving me insane. On a Wednesday afternoon, I was in the backyard, attempting to repair the fence that had been damaged in a storm last spring. I wasn't particularly handy, but I was determined to help out around the house, and YouTube tutorials made everything seem achievable. I was crouched down, trying to get a stubborn screw to cooperate when a shadow fell across my work. You're going to strip that screw if you keep forcing it like that. I looked up to find Jake standing there, tool belt slung over one shoulder, that amused smile playing at his lips. What are you doing here? I asked, sitting back on my heels. Your mom called, said you were trying to fix the fence and might need some help. He crouched down next to me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean. Here, let me show you. He took the drill from my hand, his fingers brushing mine in the transfer, and proceeded to demonstrate the proper technique. I tried to focus on what he was saying about torque and pressure, but mostly I was hyper-aware of his proximity, the way his shoulder almost touched mine, the way his hands moved with confident efficiency. See, he said, finishing the screw in seconds, it's all about the angle, here you try the next one. He handed me back the drill, and this time when our hands touched, his fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary. I looked up and found him watching me, something unreadable in his expression. Thanks, I managed. Anytime. We worked on the fence together for the next hour. Jake did most of the actual fixing while I handed him tools and tried to learn. He was patient, explaining things without making me feel stupid, offering encouragement when I actually managed to do something right. "You're not as helpless as you pretend to be," he said at one point. "I'm not pretending, I genuinely have no idea what I'm doing." He laughed. "Yeah, but you're trying, that counts for something." When we finished, my mother insisted Jake stay for dinner. It was becoming a pattern. Jake would show up, help with something, and then somehow end up at our table. My mother loved it, always thrilled to have another person to feed. My father seemed to enjoy having someone who actually understood sports and construction talk. Connor was Connor, happy to have his best friend around. And me, I was simultaneously thrilled and tortured by his presence. After dinner, Connor announced he was heading out to meet some friends. My parents disappeared into the living room to watch their nightly dose of news, which left me and Jake alone in the kitchen, ostensibly cleaning up. "Your family really hasn't changed," Jake said, drying a dish I just washed. "It's nice, comfortable." "Is your family not comfortable?" He was quiet for a moment. "My parents are great, don't get me wrong, but they're different, more formal. Dinner at my house was always this structured thing, you know? Your mom's just like, sit down, eat, tell me everything." I always liked that. "Is that why you spent so much time here in high school?" "Part of it." He set down the dish and picked up another, "but mostly it was Connor and you." My hand stilled in the soapy water. "Me." "Yeah, you were a cool kid, Alex, quiet but cool. I liked hanging out with you." I forced myself to keep washing dishes to act normal. "I didn't think you noticed me much back then. You and Connor were always off doing your own thing." "Are you kidding? Of course I noticed you." There was something in his voice that made me look over at him. He was watching me with that same unreadable expression from earlier. "You were always reading in the corner or making some sarcastic comment that would crack me up. You were the smart one, the one with something interesting to say. I was the awkward little brother who barely spoke." "You were more than that." He put down the dish towel and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, fully focused on me now. "You're more than that." The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I pulled the plug on the sink, letting the water drain, buying myself time to think of something to say that wasn't completely insane. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said before I could formulate a response. "Sure." "When you came out, was there someone? Is that what made you ready to do it?" The question surprised me. "No, I mean, I dated some in college, but there wasn't anyone specific who prompted it. It was more just, I couldn't keep lying anymore, to others or to myself." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense, must have taken a lot of courage." "You keep saying that about courage." "Because it's true." He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "Living authentically, being who you really are even when it's scary, that's real courage. That's," he trailed off, seeming to struggle with something, "that's something I admire." "Jake." "I should go," he said abruptly, pushing off the counter. "Getting late." But he didn't move. We stood there 3 feet apart in my parents' kitchen, something unspoken hanging in the air between us. I could see his chest rising and falling, his hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. "Alex," he said, and my name in his voice sounded different somehow. Waited. "Yes." He stopped, shook his head. "Never mind, I'll see you later." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen with my heart racing and my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. Connor found me an hour later, still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Jake was here." "I know, Mom told me." He sat down across from me, studying my face. "What happened?" "I don't know, that's the problem. I don't know how to describe it. He kept saying weird things, looking at me weird, and then he just left." "What kind of weird things?" I recounted the conversation, watching as Connor's expression shifted from curious to knowing. "He's struggling," Connor said finally. "With what?" My brother took a long pull from his beer, then set it down with a decisive thunk. "Okay, I'm probably breaking about 17 friendship codes here, but screw it. You're my brother and I can't watch you two dance around each other anymore." "Connor." "Jake's been different since you left. And before you ask, I mean different in the way he talks about you, thinks about you. He asks about you constantly. wants to know what you're doing, who you're seeing, if you're happy. When I told him you were coming home, he got this look on his face like, I don't know. Like Christmas was coming early. My heart was doing that painful hammering thing again. That doesn't mean anything, he's just being friendly. Alex, he showed up today without me. I didn't ask him to come help with the fence. He asked Mom what you were doing and then volunteered himself. Maybe he was bored. Maybe he wanted an excuse to see you. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to believe it so badly it hurt. But the alternative, hopping and being wrong, felt like it might actually destroy me. He's never shown any interest in guys, I said, never even hinted at it. Connor was quiet for a long moment. You remember junior year of high school, Jake dated that girl Sarah for like 3 months. Vaguely, why? They broke up because she said he wasn't emotionally available, said it felt like he was keeping her at arm's length, like his heart wasn't really in it. Connor leaned forward. Every girl he's dated since then has said some variation of the same thing, and it's not for lack of trying on his part. He wants to feel that connection, he just doesn't. Connor, that could mean a lot of things. Maybe he just hasn't met the right person. Or maybe he met the right person when he was 19 and that person was his best friend's little brother, and he spent the last 6 years trying to convince himself it didn't mean anything. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and terrifying and sickeningly hopeful. You're reading too much into this, I whispered. Maybe, but I don't think so. I think Jake's been trying to figure himself out and your coming home has brought everything to a head. Connor reached across the table and gripped my arm. I'm not saying jump into anything. I'm not saying he's definitely interested. I'm just saying, be open to the possibility. And maybe if you get a chance, talk to him, really talk to him. And say what? Hey Jake, Connor thinks you might be into me, wanna process that? Connor snorted, maybe not quite that directly, but yeah, essentially. This is insane. Welcome to life, it's pretty much always insane. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Connor's words playing on repeat in my mind. Could it be true? Could Jake really have feelings for me? And if he did, what did that mean? For him, for me, for Connor, for all of us. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Jake. Jake, sorry I left so abruptly earlier, had some stuff on my mind. Jake, thanks for letting me help with the fence, I like spending time with you. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed and deleted half a dozen responses before finally settling on. Me, I like spending time with you too. His response came immediately. Jake, yeah. Me, yeah. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Whatever he was typing, it was taking a while. Finally. Jake, can we talk sometime, just the two of us? There's some stuff I'd like to discuss. My heart was in my throat. Me, of course, when? Jake, how about tomorrow? I could pick you up, we could go for a drive. There's this spot I used to go to when I needed to think. Beautiful view. Me, sounds good, what time? Jake, too. Me, I'll be ready. I set down my phone, my hand shaking slightly. Talk. He wanted to talk. About what? About us? About whatever had made him bolt from the kitchen earlier. I rolled over, pulling my pillow over my head. Tomorrow, I'd find out tomorrow. And I had absolutely no idea whether I should be excited or terrified. Probably both. Definitely both.